want to touch on the point that you made, because obviously the SETA works quite closely with the sector as a whole. So the private sector coming to the SETA saying these are the skills, and they keep saying this is what we're looking for. What are you hearing as a SETA? What is the sector actually looking for in terms of skills? Beyond maybe the engineering perception, what is being asked for right now? What should a young person be positioning themselves for?
The transformation that we see in the sector is a big thing that is actually driving the creation of these opportunities.
A lot of the businesses that are going to be needed in the sector don't actually exist just yet. Welcome to Energy Conversations, powered by Kani Development Solutions and the African Energy Leadership Center at the WITS Business School. Welcome to Energy Conversations. Today we are joined by Robin Vilakazi, who is the acting CEO of the Energy and Water Sector Education and Training Authority, Energy and Water SETA. Robin, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Thokozile.
Absolute pleasure. In our last episode, we had Keith Bowen, who is from the National Transmission Company of South Africa, take us through how South Africa's electricity market is being rebuilt, the new structure, the new players, and the new opportunities. But a system being rebuilt only works if there are people equipped to participate in it. And that's where Energy and Water SETA comes in. So let's start there. Robin, can you tell us, what does Energy and Water SETA do, and what role do they play in the South African energy sector?
So EWSETA is the Energy and Water Sector Education and Training Authority. Our country has 21 sector education and training authorities, all of them serving different industries, and in our case, it's energy and water. So what we're mandated to do is essentially build and maintain and continually upskill a skills pipeline for the sector that we serve. And in the context of the SETAs, what that means for us is two primary core delivery mechanisms. So the one is skills planning. We're mandated to work with our industries to understand the skills needs of the industry today and in the future. And we do that in the context of whatever it is that is happening in that industry and what's planned for that industry. And then the second core of what we do is around skills delivery. So having had a plan and having an understanding of skills needs, we then use that to roll out, coordinate, facilitate, implement literally hundreds of programs across the country that respond to that skills need.
Okay, perfect. So, Robin, we often hear, and I guess we've privileged enough to be in the sector, but we often hear from our listeners, especially young people, that the energy sector feels a bit inaccessible. Some people feel as though, you needed to be part of some special club to really be able to actually join and be part of the sector. So I want to test that perception with your realities,
Sure.
So from being in the system, how accessible would you say the energy sector really is for young people?
Accessibility in the workforce is a challenge in our country, but I would never isolate it to the energy sector or any particular sector. I think potentially part of where that perception comes from is the technical nature of work in the energy sector. And I think from a gender perspective, historically, that's been seen as inaccessible. And I think also technical typically means bit of maths, a bit of science, and I think it varies depending on the role that you've got in the sector. And so perhaps that's another area where there's a perception of exclusivity or accessibility issues or whatever the case is. But I would say there's nothing in general that would limit anyone from entering the sector. What's unique about the sector, or not, it's not unique in itself, but it shares this trait perhaps with a number of different sectors. We get to interact with as just human beings living our lives. You get to interact and relate much easily to certain sectors of the economy, whether it is general services, whatever it is that you access. You can understand it, you know it, and sometimes that makes you feel that it's more accessible to you. But energy feels a bit technical, it feels big, it feels utility scale. And so that sometimes creates the perception that I can't just look at this thing and understand it from the outside. I've got to be in there to understand it. But I think there's many sectors that share that trait, and there's an extent to which someone could go about educating themselves or building a network or just having conversations with people, going on the internet, reading, watching videos and so on, that could perhaps shape that a bit differently and move away from this feeling that I'm outside of it and make it feel a bit more accessible. But it's very self-driven. It depends on the individual. There's no way you can stand outside of something and say like, this is inaccessible and just leave it at that.
Got you, got you. And I think, I mean, what you're saying, there's barriers in all sectors that we need to be looking at. I mean, you know, there's the cost of actually getting qualifications or getting the necessary technical knowledge, or, you know, like the point you're making, even knowing that a sector exists and it's actually there. So when we focus and we look at the energy sector, what would you say then are, you know, some of the biggest barriers that you're seeing in the energy sector?
Knowledge about the sector that makes it feel inaccessible is a perceived barrier, and it's at an individual level. It's something that we ought to be able to close to a large extent by ourselves. Later on, I think it would be nice if we get to chat a bit about, I'd like to share with you a bit about my journey, because I come from nowhere related, nowhere near the energy sector. And maybe I could share a bit, and that might help you understand why I hold that view. And then there are barriers to education. We know that education is often inaccessible. It can be very difficult to access, for example, funding. We do have a lot of mechanisms in the country, but I think that they are clumsy. The reality is that in many cases, or in some cases, they are clumsy. It works in some spaces it doesn't work. I think at the end of the day, there is a route for access to funding for everyone, but it does require patience sometimes, and it definitely requires persistence, resilience, you know, those sorts of traits. So that being said, the energy sector is not a sector where you've got to be a bachelor degreed engineer to get in at all. There's a lot more that's available, not necessarily at that level. That might not take you as long to actually get your foot in the door. And so it's important to know that as one goes about researching careers and opportunities in the sector, that the barrier is not that high. The threshold is not that high to get in, if that high threshold feels a bit inaccessible. And then just, I think, in terms of some of the other barriers, I would say it is important to know, to have a general idea of the field and what it is that you're dealing with. But again, I don't think that is something that's structural. That's an information gap, and we can avail ourselves of information. And you will find that the more you avail yourself of information, the more information comes to you. It's like when people say, what's the thing about red cars? Red cars, right?
You see
if I
it
ask you
everywhere,
now how
yes.
many red cars you've seen today, you won't know. You'll give me some tiny number, but when you walk out here, you'll see red cars everywhere. It's that sort of thing. If I go and educate myself about the energy sector, I will start to see the connections in my daily life, and it breaks down that barrier between myself and the sector. The reality in the energy sector is that at the moment, the sector is transforming significantly. You spoke to Keith about some of the transformation that we see in the sector. So the temptation by people within the sector might be, as I'm venturing into the uncertain, I need to be certain about at least who I'm going to be working with or who I'm going to be taking with me, because I need certainty around that to navigate the uncertainty that's ahead of me. But at the same time, I've told you that the SETA does skills planning with the sector. And what we are hearing all the time from the sector is we need more people, we need skills. We have the same group of people circling around. That in itself is a challenge at the sector level. So there is that desire from the sector for new entrants into it who will contribute, who will add value, who will help the industry to navigate the uncertainty that it faces.
And I guess, you know, energy and water SETA, that's literally the role that you guys then are able to play, and that
Yeah,
you're there to then help young people navigate
yeah.
their way through these barriers. Um, can you just share some of the programs or funding or pathways that, you know, any young person listening to this should be aware of if they're looking to say, I want to get into the sector? What can energy and water SETA present to them?
Okay, absolutely. So we've got, there's so much work we do in the sector. It's even, we could have a podcast about that on its own. But basically, the role of a SETA, like I said, is to ensure that the sector that we serve has a workforce today and in the future. And how we shape that workforce, or how we build that workforce, there's various different means and channels. So, like from a funding perspective, we've got all types of interventions across different qualification levels, across different fields, where we partner from a funding and other resource perspective with institutions that offer skills training or education programs. We partner with a number of universities across the country. We partner with a number of TFET colleges across the country. We partner with many private training providers, and we also partner with the industry itself. A lot of the industry does the internal training for their specific, whether it be their technology or for the need that they are fulfilling. And we partner with them. And the nature of the opportunity that is available to an individual who's interested. There are bursaries, there are learnership programs, which is often shorter than a bursary program. And going back to bursaries, it's across from bachelor's level right up until PhD level. We offer internships for people who have a qualification but who are looking for that first foot in the door. So we've got short courses that we offer, which most of them are in the context of the energy sector. Most of them are geared towards people who are already working in the industry, but who need their knowledge base to be refined or to be, learning about some of the new developments in the sector. I've mentioned perhaps a few of the key ones, but there's a number of interventions. We go according to what is the need, what is the skills needs in the industry, what is the knowledge need in the industry, and what is the capability and experience need in the industry. And that's how we sort of shape our work. And then on top of that, I think it's also important to note, and I think especially for young people or not so young people listening, but who've got children who might be in the schooling system. So a part of the SETA's mandate is also around career guidance. We've got programs that we run across the country where we literally go to a school at a school level or a group of schools coming together and go and educate young people about the sector, about opportunities in the sector, just to pique that interest. And in many spaces, you might not, an individual in an EWSETA program or in an EWSETA space might not necessarily be dealing directly with EWSETA. And that's because we employ a partnership model. So we would partner with ESCOM or NTCSA, let me link back to Keith, we're partnered with them. But let's say an ESCOM, let's say an IPP, an independent power producer in the space, we would partner with them, understand with them what are the needs that you are needing to fulfill for the future, work with them to co-develop and design programs that will meet that need, and then together we would go out and recruit and sort of go about doing the work. So that's the mechanism by which we do our work, but it really enables us to be flexible such that there's so much work and such a big range of different opportunities that's available.
Thank you for that, Robin. I mean, some really exciting and amazing opportunities that you mentioned, and I like what you're alluding to. It is the partnership model, and a lot of young people probably won't even recognize that they are currently in an energy and water SETA program,
Yeah.
but because it's been delivered through different industry partners. I mean, even us as a company, we're currently a beneficiary of one of an intern that's actually been funded by Energy and Water SETA
Exactly.
through the South African Wind Industry Association, and it's really all around how do we get young people into the sector. So I guess even us as a podcast, we can be thankful for the role that Energy and Water SETA is playing. is playing in the development of the necessary skills that we're trying to create in the communication space. We've spoken a lot around jobs and I think it's also important that we then consider entrepreneurship, because at the end of the day, we need to be looking at alternative economic avenues, in that we need to have young people actually getting into businesses, because at the end of the day, we can train young people for jobs, but those jobs need to come from somewhere. And very often entrepreneurship is the key to that. And when we think about the energy value chain and the opportunities presented, there's quite, it's quite a vast value chain that we're looking at. And from your perspective, where do you specifically see some of the biggest opportunities in terms of new businesses in the energy value chain?
The transformation that we see in the sector is a big thing that is actually driving the creation of these opportunities, economic opportunities, not just job opportunities, but economic opportunities. If you go back several years, ESCOM is the utility that supplies energy to us all, and that is it. And the opportunities that exist by and large in the country would be in ESCOM's value chain. So if you're a supplier to ESCOM, you're golden, right? What we've then had over more recent years, so first we've diversified in terms of technology. So we're no longer looking, we're no longer in the space where primarily it's a coal based energy value chain. It's no longer your utility. Yes, ESCOM is still obviously our national utility, but it's no longer, that's no longer the only sort of really credible source of energy for the broader population. It's not the only option that's really available anymore. And yeah, so maybe even just starting there, what that means is that there's a lot more businesses. The energy market is opening up. And so there's a lot more businesses operating in the space, and the entrepreneurship opportunities come not only in establishing those businesses and establishing sites and premises, for example, for energy generation through renewable energy. That can be something that feels quite difficult to take a bite of or take a chunk of, although we do have many entrepreneurs in the country who've done that. But there's those businesses, but now they've also got supplier needs. They don't do everything by themselves. So there's various different opportunities to get involved and become part of their value chain, whatever it may be. And it really differs according to technology and all these types of things. And what's also exciting about it is that it is projects that are being established, for the first time. So you're not coming into an ESCOM, perhaps a coal power station that has been existing for however long it's been existing for, and the only thing that needs to happen there is it needs to continue operating and being maintained and repaired and all of that. You now actually have the opportunity for entrepreneurs to come even into the conceptualization, into project development, into putting together bids, considering legislation, commercial viability, environmental impact analyses of an envisioned project before it even gets off the ground. And then, of course, if that project gets the green light, to get into the rest of operating, maintaining, and so on. And then with your coal power stations, they've obviously got a very long useful life, and they get decommissioned at the end of a very long useful life. And that useful life can be extended through certain measures as well. With other types of technologies, the life might come to an end at a sooner stage. So we've also got entrepreneurial opportunities in the space of the decommissioning, dismantling of the waste that gets created. So as an example, solar panels, just not necessarily at industrial scale or at energy generation for the country scale, but even just the solar panels that we've got floating around on rooftops in businesses and households. It's a piece of equipment that once it reaches the end of its life, which is a much shorter lifespan, it needs to be managed and handled. And it's one of the opportunities that will be coming in the next few years as the first real large-scale volumes of solar panels become, reach the end of their useful life. So a lot more opportunity certainly available across the board. Perhaps one other area that I would highlight is the let's call it demand side management. I think a lot of the rhetoric in the public might be around the supply of energy, having a secure energy supply. But demand, your supply becomes more secure when you're using less energy. And most of the quick win savings or the quick wins in energy security actually sit in managing how much energy we need in the first place. And so when we speak about energy efficiency, that's really what we're referring to. So it's the part of the industry that is concerned with reducing our demand for energy through, as an easy example, we all know to use LED light bulbs in our house because it reduces energy demand. And so if you build that into a whole range of other spaces, like even in construction of a building, the building materials that you use, the type of technology that you put in, they might have a higher upfront cost, but it saves you in energy over time. And so that's also another area in terms of gathering data, monitoring energy usage, introducing improvements in a commercial or residential environment to reduce the energy demand and so on, is also another area that's actually very rife for entrepreneurs and for smaller businesses to participate in. Lots of opportunities.
Yeah,
It's a lot.
I mean, and the recycling opportunities. So I've been quietly looking at this. I'm like, wow, Lauren, you've just told
Great.
I mean, Robin, you've just told everybody my plan. But I really do believe recycling of these panels, because I mean, what are we going to do with them? And not just from a large scale, but specifically residential, because at the end of the day, after a 10-year period, 15-year period, what are you going to do with these panels?
Exactly.
So any young person out there who's already in waste, this is a natural avenue to look at. And I think also a great point that you're making in terms of efficiency, energy efficiency. I mean, we've spoken around, I mean, we've had an episode around green buildings, but I mean, there's a big focus on those green buildings, the EPC certificates
100%.
that need to be coming out. So there's really a number of opportunity. And I guess, when we think of that value chain, also manufacturing, there's just it's the gift that keeps giving. I think what's important is, as a young person, to look at something like your South African Renewable Energy Master Plan is probably a very good place for them to also just do that bit of research. And I think the point also around business opportunities is that a lot of the businesses that are going to be needed in the sector don't actually exist just yet. And it means, for entrepreneurs or those that are entrepreneurially minded, if you've been in a different business, come use some of that innovation in the energy sector, because there's things you should be solving for that we potentially aren't already seeing.
And actually, to touch on that further, to maybe expand the point, a lot of what we're talking about is the technical sort of opportunities in the space. So it might lead you to think technical, but these types of opportunities are also open to a broader range of people and a broader skill set. If I've got legal knowledge, I can assist in deal making of setting up new projects in the energy sector and so on. If I've got a finance background, I can use financial modeling to understand or to contribute to deal making or to bid submissions or whatever the case is. So it's not just the technical, but technical people and entrepreneurs need to partner with entrepreneurs across other different spaces, because the combination of the two sets of skills and capabilities and experience is what's really important.
100% aligned with that. I think also, I mean, with that, even the creatives, will find themselves in this. I want to, and what you touched on earlier around access, or people firstly recognizing the sector as a career avenue. And very often, by the time people wake up to recognizing that, oh, this is a sector, this has opportunities, it may be a bit too late, certain opportunities are gone. What could we be doing to actually make it more visible, or make people start recognizing and seeing that this is perhaps the biggest kept secret we currently have?
From a personal, so if I'm someone who wants that access to knowledge and information, I was in a space the other day with quite a few young people, and anecdotally told them about what my experience was as at the time, probably grade 10, grade 11 student at my school. It's very funny when I think back on it, but most people didn't have computers in their homes, but we had one because my mother used to be a typing teacher. So we'd always have typewriters. And then when computers came, we were like, we were there at the forefront somewhere around having a computer. The same with the internet. But I remember, even though when I was in grade 11 matric, we had internet, very slow internet at home. I remember someone told me, go and do this particular thing, the field that I ended up entering into. And I didn't know anything about it. And I just it wasn't even Google. I think I Yahoo. I searched on Yahoo because I asked my mom which companies are in this field because I need a bursary. We can't afford for me to go to university, so I need a bursary. And my mom knew one company. And then I just started researching that company. And then I found some of the others. And when they said apply for a job, you would go and you'd get their mailing address. And then you'd send them an envelope, like a letter to say, please send me application forms. And then a few weeks later in the post, the application forms come. You sit with your little pen and you whatever, and you get your, I don't know, the things that you needed to get. Send it back. If they phone your house, remember, if they phone your house and you're not there, it's late.
It's over.
That's you keep phoning, whatever. But I think when I look at that and I think about what exists now, there's very little excuse when it comes to access to information. That's my perception, but I'm holding on to it. I prove me wrong on that. Information is at our disposal, but we've got to get ourselves into the right spaces. And so I think even knowing how the internet operates, like your algorithm, whatever you put in there, whatever it is that you're searching for is what's going to keep coming back to you. So we've got to avail ourselves of the information that is out there. I think that's number one. And across the industry, as EWSETA, we've got so many partners, potential partners, constantly approaching us who really care, and I know you care for it as well. Getting information out there, educating people about opportunities in the sector, or just about the sector in general. And a lot of partners come to us and are doing some sort of work in the space already. So I know that the information is out there. I avail myself of it because I've also had to learn about the industry at a very, very rapid pace. And I think that's the personal responsibility we've got to take on. So I think that's number one. But then also in terms of what we can do better, I think articulation, which is why I'm really glad to be here, and I'm glad for the platform that you've created to be able to articulate the ideas, the opportunities, what's out there in a simple manner that's easy for people to understand. Because everyone's messaging is different. And sometimes if I'm coming as a technical person who really wants to showcase my technical prowess, I will miss a lot of people. But again, I do think there's a range of spaces in which we are making it articulate in a way that is easy for anyone to access and for anyone to understand. And I don't think it will ever end. There's no point at which, as EWSETA, for example, we will sit back and say, like, we've put enough out there. If someone Googles them, let's go find our old whatevers. We live in the information age. So we are constantly generating and creating information that is there to be consumed. And I know we're not doing it alone as well. So we've got to keep doing that. And I think target at different audiences in different spaces, in different channels. I think that's how we get information out there.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I want to touch on the point that you made, because obviously the SETA works quite closely with the sector as a whole. So the private sector coming to the SETA saying these are the skills, and they keep saying this is what we're looking for. What are you hearing as a SETA? What is the sector actually looking for in terms of skills, beyond maybe the engineering perception? What is being asked for right now? What should a young person be positioning themselves for?
I must say in the sector, because the sector is evolving at the pace that it's evolving, and it's been evolving like that for quite some time, I wish for young people to be less fixated on a specific thing in terms of a career journey. So I'm looking at changes in the energy sector, I'm looking at changes in the world of work. And the reality is that you don't need to be perfectly trained to do one particular thing. It's more important that you are trained and capable at doing something and use that something to get your foot in the door. And once your foot is in the door, be awake and alive to everything that's happening around you. So what we're hearing from the sector against that background is there's always something that's not quite there. So you might, for example, an EPC practitioner is an energy performance certificate practitioner. I'm linking back to what you shared earlier on around green buildings. So an energy performance certificate practitioner is someone who is able to do the work to generate an an energy performance certificate for a building, right? So if you get into that space, you would need to be able to understand measurement of energy usage of a building. You'd you would have been trained to have the knowledge as to how that translates into what sits on an energy performance certificate. You'd be trained in auditing processes and procedures to ensure that the process you would have followed is credible. But as you go about that work, you're learning about energy efficiency more broadly. Like that's a body of knowledge that you would have worked out. Now, what we find is that when it gets to being, when you get to getting now into industry, yes, you might be very proficient at that. Some of what we hear from industry is things like young people coming into industry for the first time. We're challenged with things like your knowledge about the perhaps professionalism that's required in a workplace. It's sometimes we find it's some of the basics. Are you punctual? Do you dress correctly? Do you represent us well? Those are actually the concerns of industry, because industry is, I'm trying to run a business. I've got to have a sustainable business, and I need to be able to trust that when I send you out to a building to do an inspection, that you're going to represent me well, that you're not going to alienate or in any way, is the word alienate, but that you're not going to irritate my customers, that sort of thing. So that's firstly, when we talk about people coming into work for the first time, that's some of what we hear from industry. I think there's a general understanding amongst players in the industry that when it comes to doing a particular job, it's hard. EPC practitioners are one specific example where it's a bit easier. But depending on the context where you find yourself, that company has a very good understanding and knowledge that you probably won't have been trained perfectly and specifically for that opportunity in their company to use their software tools and technology. There's an understanding from industry that there's a part that they need to bring to make you fit for purpose in a particular role. And so sometimes some of those things come out as gaps, but I think they get communicated as gaps, but there's also an acknowledgement that, like, okay, there's a piece that we have to do to make you work specific to the job that we've got for you. And then I think the other area is transferability of knowledge to different spaces. So as an example, I'm going to use the EPC example again. I might be trained to issue audit certificates, but I should be able to take my knowledge and become an advisor or a consultant on how to make your building more efficient so that next time you do an EPC certificate, you've got a better rating. So being able to take knowledge and transfer it into different environments, which in itself is a skill, but we do find that industry wants that sort of, wants that transferability, which really means that when you study or when you take on your knowledge, you shouldn't be narrow in how you do it. It should be really the pursuit of knowledge, because once you've got knowledge that is embedded in you, you're able to take it into different environments and to transfer that knowledge and apply it in different environments.
100%. And I like how you're putting it, because the reality is no one's going to arrive at that job perfectly ready for everything that industry is going to look
Big
for.
misperception.
Big misperception.
Yeah.
But I do think, and as you're saying, there are some of those basics, right? So I'm an avid believer in that the technical can be taught. I can get you there technically,
Totally.
but you must want to get there technically. So how
100%.
are you showing up? Are you showing up, as an empty cup, ready to be filled, ready to learn? Or are you saying, no, well, I'm going to continue
Yeah.
typing like it's Mix-It, or,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
So I think there's
Or I
a,
want what I want as well. I think we've got huge volumes. We've got a youthful population, so we've got many children coming out of school on an annual basis. The reality is that even our public education system, especially universities, are not actually able to take everyone and find a spot for them to access further education. So what it's created, what that dynamic creates, is that if I'm fortunate enough to be one of those people who've had access to education, I might have a superiority complex about it. And so when I, as a 21-year-old, get to work, I'm like, where are my benefits? Where's my this? Where's my that? I want this, I want that, which is not how the world works. But unfortunately, I think it's created by the reality that further education is not accessible to everyone today, even still, as much as we're trying to increase and improve access. Today, the reality is it's still not there for everyone. And I think it's partly our public system, but partly also socioeconomic circumstances in our country that drive us there. So that showing up as an empty cup is a big thing in many spaces, because many of us arrive saying, I'm here, I've been filled. I'm filled more than this person I see around me, more than the kid up my street, more than my cousin. So I've arrived.
that is such a, and I think it raises a tougher question too, because the reality is you can arrive there with your full cup of a qualification, but is your qualification really what's needed right now? Like, at the end of the day, like when we think about our TVETs, we think about our universities, are they in fact producing the right graduates? So now I have a graduate with the piece of paper, but I don't know what to do with you and your piece of paper. So where do you see, and I guess, from an energy and water SETA perspective, where are you seeing some of the biggest gaps between what, your institutions, your TVETs, your universities are turning out, and what the sector actually needs?
The issue, especially in the energy sector, has been rapid transition. Rapid transition. So we've had to move away from the model that I think would be more standard, and this would be the standard model, the ideal standard model. You sit with industry, you see the changes happening over the next few years, you plan for them, you say, okay, we need this type of qualification and this type of skill set imparted onto people. You develop accredited programs, then people go through those programs, they get their certificate at the end of the day, and by the time they get to work, industry says, yes, that thing we spoke about 3 years ago, yes, that's been 3 years is long now, right? So what we would have been planning for and training for 3-4 years ago is likely adapted by the time that the same person who benefits from that process gets into the workplace. It doesn't completely invalidate what they would have done, what they would have been taught. I think where we're moving towards now is that we try as EWSETA to be very agile in our approach and flexible in our approach. So when it comes to the quality of a graduate that is produced, that's not an area where I'd say we compromise in. And I think the qualifications framework in our country, the formal education system in our country is quite robust in that regard. So there's no cutting corners, definitely. But we do see how, when qualifications are being offered, how do we supplement that with real good workplace-based experience that learners get during the time when they go through their qualification. So they're learning about the most recent developments. they're also getting into industry and building a little bit of their own starting network. They're being put in front of and alongside people who are working in the industry. And I think also we're a bit we 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 are embracing some agility with short courses that just have a much quicker route to market, where you can, supplement formal qualifications with short courses if there's an extra bit of whatever that needs to be taught. I think we've got many providers in the country, and universities are particularly good at that, as well as the producing and packaging of short courses that give you just that little extra bit here and there. Um, and then I think maybe the last point is to highlight again, when you ask the question of are we producing qualifications that are fit for what is needed in the workplace? I think we're slowly starting to get to the point where the workplace is realizing, like we've mentioned, that you don't get a fully baked cake at the end. That's just a product that a human being that you plug into your process, and they're going to run without any guidance, any mentorship, any coaching, any on-the-job training. That, I think, industry is coming to that realization, which we really appreciate, because we don't want to have businesses in our country that have the wrong perception around that, because it's very important to feed into people who work in your business. So I think it's not my answer can never be a clear yes or no. Like, it can't be that our graduates, our qualifications are perfectly fit for purpose at any point in time, that our graduates are perfectly fit for purpose at any point in time. There's a lot that goes into that, but I don't think we're so far off the mark if we all bring our part.
I guess that the reality is those qualifications have a place, but there is supplement that's going to be needed, and maybe it's the notion of work readiness. I think you've spoken or made a point around that before, in that whoever was work ready when they started their first job.
Who was? Were you?
I mean, I'm surprised they let me in the building. I didn't know how to write an email. So
Exactly.
and then I guess those are the conversations we do need to have, that at the end of the day, how do we fill that gap? The qualification gets you perhaps in the door, or maybe, in the case where we have this rapidly transforming sector, those qualifications perhaps don't necessarily get you in the door. And maybe as industry, we've got to take a look and say, in the absence of a qualification that perfectly fits into what I'm looking for, what is it that I can do to supplement any young person that's coming into my organization? What I do want to touch on, though, is, there's a lot of training that's happening in the sector. So there's lots of training, there's lots of opportunities. But again, how do we, in the training that we then are providing, how do we ensure that that training is aligning with the market and aligning with those opportunities? So anything that we're doing then in supplement of these qualifications, how are we making sure that, okay, as these opportunities come, they or whatever you've been trained for? Because I mean, we can take something like solar installation, for example. I think at some point we're going to have a saturation. So I'm going to be a solar installer, but where am I going to install? So how do we manage? How are you looking at that as a sector?
Very relevant question. One of the biggest challenges that we deal with, because we operate in a rapidly transitioning sector, is timing. And that is precisely why we think qualifications are important, but we've got to be flexible as well. I'll give you the example of the hydrogen economy, right? We've got great national plans related to the hydrogen economy. And there's many pieces that need to come together in order for the industry to actually take off. Many different moving parts, like from sort of national planning and regulation to actually putting projects together, to community assessment and impact. All of these things, they need to come together, and that is what's going to drive the timing of when hydrogen economy kicks off and when skills are needed. But we've already done the skills planning, and we understand what skills are going to be needed. More or less in which quantities, maybe that's still vague. Precisely what's going to be needed, there's a level of knowing that. Timing, there's hardly any certainty as to specificity on the timing. So what what that creates is that we do need to be flexible and adaptable, and those of us who are training for specific things also need to be flexible and adaptable and understand that whatever your training is, you might not be able to apply it in precisely the way that you thought when you took on the career. Personally, I believe that you'll end up where you're meant to end up. I believe that um, that a career path is not meant to be linear, especially in today's world. But I think if we could adopt more of that thinking, it might, allay some of the frustrations. And when you talk about doors, qualification being your foot in the door, the reality is the doors are few. The doors are few, and today I can't tell you when every door in the future might or might not open. So those are the dynamics. Timing is one of the biggest dynamics that we grapple with. However, we work very closely with our industry. So when putting programs together, whether it's accredited programs that we meticulously develop, or when we partner with our industry to deliver unaccredited programs, it really is based on what industry is saying. And we have a process whereby we vet with them and we understand, we get into quite a structured and deliberate process with them to say, what specifically are we trying to do? How will we get there? But it is honestly industry-led, and it's SETA coordinated and facilitated. And I think that is the biggest means by which we try to, by which we're going to get this right as we can get it, because we'll never get it perfect. And important in that is industry participation. When industry is called upon, in many spaces in our industry, we actually do find that they do ensure that they're present in those engagements. This is a public good that we're creating, and so we've all got to participate in it. It cannot be government led. So that's the approach that we take to try to make sure that that gap between what is required and what is available is as small as possible.
Got you. And I think it's quite interesting. Like the hydrogen point was a good one to make, because I mean that's some of the, I guess, the innovations, or where the sector's kind of moving towards. What else are you seeing in terms of innovations that are kind of shaping the sector now, that as a young person, maybe, we're not sure timing exactly in terms of green hydrogen, but, there's AI, or there's this.
Yeah.
What are some of the tangible innovations that a young person could be looking at right now?
I think some sort of base qualification is always going to be great. You spoke about solar panels, solar installers, and even to be a solar installer, we don't really want solar installers who don't have some sort of electrical background, just on a safety level as a basic. So I think to get into some sort of a base level of learning and qualification is great, because from there you can springboard into many of the innovations, but you would have an understanding, of what it is, where it comes from, how it operates at a very basic level, or you can be taught that very quickly. So I think smart technology, when we talk smart technology, I'm talking about things like smart metering and that sort of thing is a big area of innovation. But again, not for someone who's blindly coming into it for the first time. You've got to have a bit of knowledge to know what it is that's being made smart. I think microgrid technology, and I know the DEE, the Minister of Electricity and Energy, also talks about this. Microgrid technology is something that, from a national plans perspective, is being looked at to roll out at a much larger scale going forward. And we've, a great example, EWSETA does plan together with national plans. So a few months ago, we've just had our microgrid qualifications approved. So we've actually got formal qualifications to be taught about microgrid technology. I think as advanced technologies like smart meters or smart devices and microgrids reach a level, as they progress, I think AI is something to keep our eye on, because AI is going to start becoming smarter and being more integrated into those smart technologies. You spoke about hydrogen. I think, is there anything else? What do you have?
Thinking, what else would we have? Yeah, I think
Thinking of the top.
E-mobility.
Oh, yeah.
E-mobility
Yes,
would
yes.
also, I think,
Big.
be quite another. I think, especially even looking at, scooters, maybe even
Yeah,
as alternatives, we probably have to be looking at that. And I
yeah.
think, yeah, we've touched on smart meters as well. But I do think, yeah, I think the e-mobility opportunity is perhaps another one.
E-mobility and smart agriculture. So if I
Yes.
just think about net zero ambitions, agriculture is actually a big driver of how we will be able to get there, and then, yeah, and e-mobility as well. Interestingly for me, there's culture change that's required around that as South Africans. What do I mean by that? So scooters right now, we've got scooters more than we've ever had before, right? I mean, a few years ago, we didn't have scooters on the road really. But it's around, the delivery services or mobile sort of services being delivered. But my, I have this dream to to be a scooter driver one day. Like, I would love to have a scooter. I live so close to work. I'd love to be able to take a scooter to work, but I just feel like it's not there socially.
I get you.
So it's culture. We've got to shape and drive different culture. And also looking at net zero, even the diet that we consume as South Africans does not lend itself to reduction of carbon emissions. I'm talking about meat. So I think in our country, there's advocacy and education, and I think mind change and culture change that needs to come around some of those initiatives as well. But I think they're great. They would be so great for us and for the world. We have a bit of culture work to do in South
There
Africa.
is, because I think, and you bring up the culture or just perceptions around certain things. What comes to mind is actually when we think of clean cooking, right? And that's
Yeah.
LPG gas. So,
Yes.
G20, big declaration has been made. Everybody got around the table and agreed and said, clean cooking, that is our solution, right? But now you sit with the nation where the average person on the ground is saying, "Whoo,
Yeah.
Has I don't want
Yeah.
anything to
Yeah.
do with it, So I think it
Yeah.
also, because I think the distribution of LPG also, I guess, presents another opportunity for young people, but there's a change, there's an
Shift that needs to
education
happen.
that's kind of needed in that area as well.
Yeah. And let me just say, I don't think it's impossible. As part of the G20 program, we've launched a legacy project with ESCOM and other partners around clean cooking, and we've gone and taken it out to communities. And I think we did sort of a first pilot community. We piloted at a very small scale, and then we went back a few months later and rolled out to more households. And when we got there the second time, you could tell that people were now open. And what one of the gentlemen said to us was, let's do more just education around it. So now this gentleman from the community was saying, and he's not a community leader, it's just a guy, he's a citizen, he lives there. And he was saying, I went around like the granny next door. They both have clean cooking. They've both got LPG stoves now as a result of the program. And I went to the granny next door, and she wanted help with the gas, so she called me over the wall or whatever. When I went around, I could smell gas in her house. So you've got to like educate people more. He was worried about the education of people, but he was a convert, So it's not impossible. We can do it, but it's got to be done.
No, it's got to be done, and we're here. We're here to educate. We're here to educate. Robin, before we close, I wanted to hear from you. Is there anything that you wish we had discussed or we covered that we just haven't gotten around to in this conversation that you would like to leave our audience with?
For me, what's exciting is the opportunities that the energy sector presents, which I think is, mostly what we've been talking about. There's a perception that the education and training system of our country and the post-school education and training system of our country is supposed to deliver jobs. And the reality is that education and training in itself doesn't create jobs. It is a vehicle by which we prepare a workforce for jobs that should be out there. So I think I'm excited about the opportunities that we've got for industrialization as a country and for South Africa to really take decisive steps. I think we've got policies and we've got ideas, but in terms of implementation, decisive steps in implementation that really kicks off our industrialization and kicks off that ability that we have to harness the natural endowments of this country, like our platinum, like we've done with coal, but like our platinum, like our renewable energy sources, and to really position ourselves in the global economy. So we're excited about that. And not that it's not what we've spoken about during this conversation, but I think EWSETA is just, we are just ready to take that on and to create, skills for that world in which South Africa stands out as to how we've responded to the energy challenges that we've come from, but also the opportunities without our challenges, ignoring our challenges, the opportunities that the energy sector presents. We've really got an amazing opportunity as a country, and I'm excited as EWSETA and as part of EWSETA to build for that future.
I love it. The skills for Wakanda.
There you go. There you go.
But Robin, thank you. Thank you so much. This has really been an insightful conversation and one I believe our audience has been waiting for and has been looking forward to. So thank you very much for sharing so generously. If you took something from this conversation, share it with someone who needs to hear it. A young person figuring out their own path, a friend trying to transition into the sector, or an entrepreneur looking for their next opportunity. The point of energy conversations is to widen who gets to participate in the just transition, and that work won't happen without you. So please feel free to share the conversation, like, share, and subscribe, and stay connected, and let's keep this conversation going. Thank you for listening to Energy Conversations, powered by Kani Development Solutions and the African Energy Leadership Center at the WITS Business School.